So today my daunting task with everybody is to tell you about the Constitution of India and what it means. भारत का संविधान और उसकी क्या वो कितना महत्वपूर्ण है हमारी ज़िंदगी में. When I began thinking about this lecture, there were many ways you could take it. Do you want to talk about the executive, the judiciary, the legislature and where it's going? Do we want to talk about institutions and how they affect us? But I thought I will talk to you about the Constitution and the heart of our Constitution, which is the preamble, and talk to you about the Constitution and how it works in your lives as teachers. How do we make a classroom more constitutionally friendly? And actually, how much of the Constitution affects our lives? So who all know the Constitution by heart? Out of choice? Not out of chance? The preamble, sorry, my bad, preamble, ma'am. I'm very nervous. I'm scared of my teachers in school, and I'm even more scared of the teachers here. So, please. More or less? So the Constitution starts with we the people of India resolve to constitute India into a sovereign, secular, socialist, democratic republic and to give to all its citizens justice, liberty, equality and fraternity. And on this day we have resolved, which is the 26th of November 49, sorry, my bad. When we talk about, I wanted to actually show you how it is enshrined and engraved, but that we will come to later. I'm supposed to apparently say, since this is a teacher's classroom, if you have anything to say to each other, you can also tell to the other members in the classroom, so kindly refrain from talking with each other. Yeah, I said it. Oh, I've said it, so I'm very happy about it. Now we can go on with the lecture. भारत के संविधान की बहुत सारी खूबियां हैं और सबसे बड़ी खूबी इस संविधान की ये है कि इट इज़ एन एस्पिरेशनल फ्रेमवर्क. हम क्या बनना चाहते हैं, बट इट इज़ ऑल्सो एन इम्प्लीमेंटेशनल फ्रेमवर्क. हम क्या हैं, तो इट recognizes how flawed we are as a people, but also aspires to tell us how we can become better than ourselves. What the Constitution in the recent times and the way the Constitution has been implemented by the judiciary has also helped, and the way people engage with the Constitution has helped the Constitution become something more than what, let's say, it was aspired to do. So when we talked about the notion of equality, till a year ago, the notion of equality was around gender, it was around caste, it was around race, it was around religion. And then something very beautiful happened. We said, the Constitution said, equality also lies with people who are minorities belonging, who have a different sexual preference. So the expansion of the definition of equality to include all minorities was a very interesting step. The reason why I am raising this to begin with in the conversation is to say that the more we engage with the Constitution, the more we start realizing how much the Constitution affects us on a daily basis, is when we also will push the Constitution to become something better than what we are aspiring to be. So the aspirational part and its implementation depends entirely around people like us in this classroom. Teachers, students, parents of those children, and once they start engaging with the Constitution, do many things happen. Before I begin the film, what do we mean by equality and what do we mean by inequality? Anybody?
equality is when we are all on the same page, on the same thing, and there is no discrimination done
Okay.
on the basis of caste, color, creed, religion, gender, etc.
Exactly.
Equal opportunities and same benefits, same benefits and equal opportunities.
Is equal opportunity and same benefits the same idea? I'm going to raise this, you raised it, and I'm going to flag this off because that's a very integral question for the classroom. मैं play कर दूं?
Roll number 21. Roll number 22.
वहाँ से भी गया.
Roll number
भैया एक तो चलने दो. Okay, so since it has begun with the day of disasters, it will be a day of disasters. So second, going from ma'am's idea, what is enshrined in the constitution? संविधान क्या कहता है? Equality को किस तरीके से define करता है? Equality of people, so no discrimination, but it also says equal opportunity. Is that in conflict with one another? Yeah, okay. Is that in conflict with one another? Yes, ma'am.
When we say equal opportunity, then obviously discrimination, everybody should be careful, but there is discrimination.
There is discrimination. So when there is discrimination, how does equality and equal opportunity play with each other? I'd like to begin with this film. Hopefully it shall play now.
roll number 21. Roll number 22. Roll number 23. Roll number 24. Roll number 25. Roll number 26. Roll number 27. Roll number 28. Roll number 29. Roll number 30. Roll number 31. Roll number 32. Roll number 33. Roll number 34. Roll number 35. Roll number 36. Roll number 37. Roll number 38.
So as you continuously struggle with the idea of what your classroom must be like. And when we classroom, what does it mean to have equity in the classroom? And how do we as teachers give equal opportunity to children in our classroom? I'm assuming a lot of you are from public schools in the city. One of the biggest questions that public schools had to answer on the question of equality in a classroom was when the Right to Education Act was passed in 2009. And public schools were opened out for children like those, a rag picker, a child laborer, a child from a slum, perhaps our own peon bhaiya's child, our conductor bhaiya's child, were all now going to be part of your classroom. But a lot of public schools in this country oppose the idea of the classroom on the ground of what? Finances Yes, that was a good front. But what was the real reason?
The reason was
One
that
second.
children often learn from the environment, and their environment was not suitable for the elite children who were already coming to school, and they would make an impact on the children who were already in public schools.
Okay.
Creates a divide in the class.
A division in the classroom.
Okay. Very important things that you said. It creates a division. Children are the elite children have to be faced with somebody whose environment is very different from theirs. The results of the schools will be affected. Very, very important things. Inferiority complex.
There was also a reason of the schools which have to go out of the comfort zone to accommodate these students.
The most important thing, I think, and I studied in an elite school in Delhi, which was one of my favorite experiences. I feel like I've done a PhD in schools primarily because I've changed 13 schools in my life. I've gone from boarding schools to missionary institutions to public schools to government schools, and therefore I feel like when I talk about schools, I feel a certain affinity and also a comfort to be able to raise certain difficult issues. But I think to begin with, all of these ideas are important, and the idea of discomfort for everybody involved was very, I think, the underlying aspect. I mean, prejudice, sort of discrimination, all of those things aside, and I will address that. I like to share a very interesting story with discomfort and how do we make people comfortable in our classroom. I'm not sure if you all have heard of Sister Cyril of the Loreto Convent Institutions. You are from there. Sister Cyril opened her school out. Loretos are considered one of the best schools in the country, one of the best institutions to go study in, and she was the principal of a school called Loreto Shialda in Calcutta. Yes, and it was she one day when there was a rape of a 4-year-old girl right outside her school, she decided to open her school out for what she now describes as rainbow children. What she did in that classroom, what she did was then she opened out her terrace and invited young people, young girls to come and live in that home. And that became their home because she said, you're on the streets, in the footpath, you'll be able to come in. What she also noticed, so once she opened her house out for them, she also decided to open her classrooms out for them. What she noticed very interestingly in the classroom was that these children were not comfortable with the uniform, with wearing shoes, because they had never worn shoes. They never had the luxury of shoes. They never had the luxury of bathing, getting ready, and understanding and organizing themselves. So she started a very interesting thing which continues till date, is that she banned shoes from her classroom. A simple gesture, recognition of what that rainbow child will be going through. A simple gesture took her classroom to one more step of equality. When we as teachers are engaging with the question of the classroom, our biggest responsibility, in my opinion, is the question of ensuring both equality but also equity. What is equity? The idea that we have to go one step further for those who are the most vulnerable in our classroom. So, while the schools worried about what their children what the elite children might be going through, no classroom thought about what the poor child will be going through. And if we want, the classroom can be so much more equitable. Simple things. The idea of homework, the recognition or that there will be somebody else out there who will take on the responsibility of educating the child is a privilege. For a first time learner in a classroom, he or she has nobody else to turn to apart from you. You will be the guide. She also doesn't have the resources to be able to find somebody else to teach them. I'll give you an example of one of my driver bhaiyas who's been with me for the longest time, my father's driver. And his daughter was put through the EWS quota into a elite school. And I found that the school would send out circulars to parents on a regular basis. Simple thing. It's not uncommon. We have WhatsApp groups in schools now where parents are continuously sent all sorts of things, including homework and responsibilities and so on and so forth. So sending a circular out is not an act of inequality. But sending a circular out purely in English is the recognition, is the complete non-understanding of the fact that you have a diversity in your classroom. The fact that my driver bhaiya can read Hindi is something that as a school they should have thought of. All people can read Hindi, but very few people can read English. And when you have a diverse classroom, he used to hesitatingly come to me because I am the young one. He used to come to me and say, "Can you read this out and explain this to me?" The burden of the parent to have to adjust to a school that was otherwise very socially conscious, very caring, extremely understanding of differences and diversity, does not recognize something as simple as a circular can disempower a person. They can make somebody feel small, unequal, like they don't deserve this. Going back to Sister Cyril, she did many, many interesting things, and I'm a great admirer of her. One of the things she did when the idea of question of finances came up and merit came up, some child came up to her and said, "Why should we be funding these street children?" So she got the child in because it happened in the classroom and the teacher wasn't, and it reached her. So she pulled the child into the classroom and she said, out of the class and to her office, and she asked her, she said, "Okay, you are saying that why should you be paying for it? You answer this one question. Do you go out and work every day? Are you earning the money? Are you footing the bill for your education?" What was the child's answer? A resounding no. So she said, "For me, you are also a free child because you are not paying for it. Similarly, so is the other child a free child because she is not paying for it." What the parents decide to do does not affect the classroom. Your parents made the decision of putting the child into the school, and therefore for me you're both equal. But when the question of equality comes in, we talk about giving spaces to diversity in the classroom. But when we talk about equity, that's when it gets much trickier. How does equity come into the framework of a classroom? What do we understand by equity, let's say? Yeah. Yes, in very simple terms. Opportunity is given to ensure that those who are deprived of opportunities get more opportunities so that we can create a level playing field. What is the biggest argument against the idea of giving supplemental opportunity? Huh? Sorry? See, there are no wrong answers. This is a conversation. Anybody? That's one, yes.
Or maybe the question whether they will cope with it.
Whether they can cope with it or not. What else? Okay, interesting. You brought that very fundamental question into the classroom of reservation. Don't get the right. Okay. Sometimes the more deserving don't get the right. What else? Yes, but that's the idea of equal opportunity and going one step ahead. But what else is? So let's address the question of the first question, or rather the underlying question of merit and deserving. Okay. When we talk about merit, what are we saying essentially? Yeah, but so the parameter of judgment is based on a prescribed formulation, right? So my question to you is that, okay, this is not a video, but just a case study. How do we decide the merit of a child in these three different situations? So there's my child. I'm a lawyer, activist, earn enough money. My parents have been kind, so I have a house, and my child has a domestic help to cater to his umpteen needs, food on the table at any given point of time, and the luxury of AC, 3-4 grandparents doting on him at any given point of time, domestic help, the fact that he'll go into a classroom, and if I find he can't cope, I'm putting tuitions for him, and I can afford to get the best education, the best tuitions for him. Versus a slum child whose parent is working as the domestic help in some of our houses, that he or she is a first time learner, that when he goes back home or she goes back home, he goes back into an environment in that day. He has to ensure that the house is up and running for his mother, so that she has less of a burden when she comes back home, because she'll come back home at 9, 7, 5, 7 at night, then we'll make dinner for him, then we'll engage. She cannot afford tuitions for him. She cannot perhaps afford electricity in her house, or she can, and she ensures that he gets fed enough, has a bath, is neat and clean, and comes to the classroom. Versus Sister Cyril's rainbow child, a child who lives on the street, has faced huge amounts of abuse, has faced huge amounts of violence on the street, usually gets abused every other night when she's sleeping by herself on the street, has to wake up early in the morning and forage for food, is sometimes begging, sometimes involved in casual sex work, many times may not be the primary bed earner, but is the primary caregiver to younger siblings who are also born out of rape on the streets. In the streets of Delhi, just down this road in Nizamuddin, where I work with the homeless, you'll hear stories of such children. When all three of them are sitting in the classroom, my question to you is, how are you going to decide who's meritorious and who's not? I have the ability to pull up my child because I have the financial means of doing so. So even if my child is a weak student, whatever that the identification of education of a good weak child and a non-weak child is. But what is the idea? How I have the ability to mask over his weaknesses. You all have the ability to mask over the others. An equal classroom is also about recognizing that merit. The conversation of merit is also a conversation about privilege. When I sit in a Nalsar or an NLS, because I'm a lawyer, but my father teaches at IIM, and one of the things he always turns around and tells the students, and I do that with students that I lecture also, is the idea that you can sort of interchange merit with the notion of privilege as if it's a right. The classroom is about creating equality. It's also about creating equity. Merit, the notion of merit, I would say that if, I'll give you my example. I was born in Madhya Pradesh. I spent much of my life there. And I used to love Hindi as a language because I learned Hindi in my growing years. I had a classroom and a class teacher in one of the best boarding schools in the country who's extremely mean as a teacher. mean to the extent that if you didn't pass, you didn't write according to her, there was a complete, she used to throw examination papers across the room. Now I am 33, classrooms have changed, I am hoping, but I went from somebody who used to get 90% in Hindi in class 3 to somebody who used to get 35% in Hindi in class 7. And my parents were horrified by that idea. Because I come from a Hindi speaking state. I was born and brought up in a Hindi speaking state. And then I came to Delhi and I went to this really nice school where the teachers were extremely, extremely kind and very, very caring. And my Hindi teacher was the sweetest person with me. And she understood me and she understood my talent. And I write poetry in Hindi for my own sake, but she got me interested back in Hindi to the extent that till class 12 and even now, my way of expressing myself is through Hindi poetry. And I never forget her. But she took that extra effort with me. So when we do that with a child when we do that with children who are apparently of the same setup, when you make that extra effort with somebody, sometimes we have to recognize that making that extra effort and even extra effort with somebody else creates that equality and equal opportunity. A child who doesn't speak English in a class, outside the classroom, will always be uncomfortable with speaking in English in the classroom itself, because there is no reinforcement of that language. However, if we let the child express themselves without humiliating them and allow a space in a classroom that allows expression, perhaps the same child may be the next Amitabh Ghosh or Shashi Tharoor, we don't know, and that child could be a child from the street. The other more linked question, and I am going to jump into the next sort of core principle of the Constitution, which is justice, is the idea of merit in the concept of justice. How do we define what is justice? How do we define justice? Am I boring you all or little bit, I think? Huh? Little bit? Yeah, please, ma'am.
I think India has, or a non-deserving candidate going ahead, everything is happening here. Like,
Yeah.
you understand what I'm saying? Like, it's the country where everything is happening. The non-deserving ones are getting whatever, they don't deserve. And
Okay.
probably the deserving ones.
Illustratively, if you have an example, how are we defining who deserves the next step and who doesn't? In the sense, let's talk freely and without judgment.
Assessment or judgment. So if that is okay with all students and they are given that kind of opportunity
Yeah.
and not given choice based on their preferences, and then you try to, because there is difference in that approach as well, because as psychologists I know there are perceived justice and real justice. So I don't get to that what you are saying, I really agree that how do we appear to be just in a classroom as a teacher also is sometimes
Yeah.
debatable from student point of view.
From,
Justice and equality are
yeah.
and it is to ensure that
Yes, but ma'am, the question is that how do you define justice? Justice in a classroom is us giving equal marks to all the children. That could also be considered justice. That's blind justice. Right?
Depends on how
One second, ma'am. I'll just hear her. We'll hear her, then we'll come back to you.
justice depends on the judge.
Okay.
The judge has to be, yes. It depends on how judgmental the judge is.
Yes, but
Justice goes on redefining itself in every situation, every aspect. Because at one point, justice might be that equal opportunity. In another case, justice could be the correct thing happening, no impartiality.
no impartiality. So how do we define the notion of both justice in the context of equality? See, justice is in very sort of everyday terms, it is doing right for somebody who'd been wronged. Right. If
That also differs because what is right and wrong is age appropriate, and you are not a perfect person to correct him during that stage, whether it's right or wrong.
Okay.
Age appropriate.
yes,
And you are not a justified person to tell the child this is right and that is wrong.
okay,
But if we don't judge, who is going to judge?
true, true.
That every story has two sides, right? If supposedly if I hurt anyone and the justice is dealt on the basis of that they are giving me punishment because I hurt someone, but without knowing what was the reason behind my action, so that would be like, that's what I'm saying. Like, it's
Completely. See, there were some very important points raised here. One, that justice depends on the judge, very true. The other is that in what situation justice is meted out, like ma'am said and you said, has different implications. I just like you to take you through an unlinked, outside the classroom, an unlinked statistic. This is the National Crime Records data, right? The National Crime Records data in this country says, and people in jail currently or charged with crime are three sets of people. Okay. One, those who are below, education levels are below class 10. Second lot of people are people from minorities. Third lot of people are people from discriminated backgrounds such as SC, STs and Dalits, so scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. They are an unfair majority in the justice system. So the question to you is that, is impartiality defined also by the recognition of our prejudice? Are we harsher to people in a classroom, not in a classroom, but are we harsher to people because we pre-decide based on their appearance, based on their identity, based on their gender, what they are capable or not capable of doing, right? As women, as it turns out, only women in this room, how many times have you felt that what was rightfully yours has not come to you? How many times, whether it's at home, whether it is in a setup, whether it is post-marriage, that you feel that what is yours, that you have been discounted because you're a woman, because you're in your husband's house and they feel ke bahu beti nahi ho sakti. How many times have we faced injustice? The number of people who nodded here, ma'am, there are a lot of them. And a lot of them are smiling and not nodding. Some of us are lucky. What?
I think in the modern sector, most of the times it's the other way around.
Really, ma'am?
But she's talking about herself.
Before married. Before married. Somebody felt it before marriage. Somebody, see, sometimes you also must recognize, okay, I'll give you a very different setup, a different line of thought. I meet people who are manual scavengers. You know who are manual scavengers? Manual scavengers, people, yeah? I think have you been told about manual scavenging? No, or you know about it, great. So, when we talk about manual scavengers, I was having this group discussion once, different sort of age groups, different genders, people sitting together in a focus group discussion around ending manual scavenging and the next steps out of it within the community. These are people who are manual scavengers. If somebody doesn't know, raise your hands and I'll explain what is manual scavenging. You don't know? Manual scavenging is basically people whose job it is to pick up shit, human excreta, from toilets, bathrooms, public spaces and clean them, right? So, the idea there is that, and that is a caste definitive idea, that you belong to a certain caste and because of your caste you are born into doing that work.
It was present at the time when you had the concept of dry toilets. Now we no longer have, we have pits and all, and this is something I think which is being banned by the law, and even then it is persistent.
It is very prevalent. Do you know who's the biggest violator of the Manual Scavenging Act in this country? Biggest violator of the Manual Scavenging Act. Manual scavenging, the idea of dry latrines have been banned in this country under a law which was a 1996 Manual Scavenging Act. It's prevalent in most parts of India, including Delhi, ma'am. Yes. So what happened was that, so how does justice work? You know? Huh? Who's the biggest violator? Indian Railways. Biggest violator of the Manual Scavenging Act is the Indian Railways. What happens? You shit into an open hole, the open hole goes onto the ground and people are then responsible to clean the tracks, right? Because it does not automatically become part of the soil. Why? There are stones on there, the tracks are stones, so it cannot go down. Okay. So, and they also employ, so how does discrimination work? When we talked about this, essentially what you are talking about, ma'am, the newspaper articles are about sewer worker deaths. So, over time it's become banned and everybody said that it's terrible, let's not do this. And that's also the engagement, as I was saying, of what we are and what we aspire to be. So the aspirational idea is that why should somebody else be cleaning our own shit? It's somebody else's responsibility. It's a caste-based identity, it's many things. But how does blind justice work? Blind justice works in the way that the municipal corporation of most cities put out ads for hiring people who were supposed to work as sewer workers, right? But the qualification and criteria, sorry, my bad, are based entirely on a certain caste-based identity. So, people, manual scavengers who are now banned have moved into becoming sewer workers. Sewer work is actually highly toxic work. How many biology teachers are there? Ma'am, how does methane gas work in a biogas pit? There are times when you can you can dive into a drainage sewage pit and die within minutes of entering a sewage pit. Exactly. So, what has happened is that while manual scavenging has been banned, sewer worker work has not been banned. But who are employed to do the sewer worker work are precisely people with the same caste identity. So the reason, in this context, there was a very interesting conversation that I had with sewer workers. And that's where the idea of injustice comes in. So, the sewer workers essentially turned, when in the group discussion, I was asking them, I said, why don't you give up manual scavenging as a work and take on something else? And the lady in the group turned around and said, हमको तो कुछ और नहीं, and we are okay with this. Don't destabilize what I have in my life. This was a lady. She was about in her 50s. She was born into a family of manual scavengers, married into one, and then she became a government. Matlab, she's municipality appointed manual scavenger. And I was extremely sort of surprised by the idea that, oh, there's this law, come out, let's pull you out of what you have and let's bring you into a new world and then you can learn something else and do something else. But there was complete, and there was a generational pushback saying, we are okay in this. It's a very different conversation with the younger people, children of those manual scavengers, who turned around and said that without recognizing that we don't have a government school in our area, we don't. Somebody, see, sometimes you also must recognize, okay, I'll give you a very different setup, a different line of thought. I meet people who are manual scavengers. You know who are manual scavengers? Manual scavengers, people, yeah? I think have you been told about manual scavenging? No, or you know about it, great. So, when we talk about manual scavengers, I was having this group discussion once, different sort of age groups, different genders, people sitting together in a focus group discussion around ending manual scavenging and the next steps out of it within the community. These are people who are manual scavengers. If somebody doesn't know, raise your hands and I'll explain what is manual scavenging. You don't know? Manual scavenging is basically people whose job it is to pick up shit, human excreta, from toilets, bathrooms, public spaces and clean them, right? So, the idea there is that, and that is a caste definitive idea, that you belong to a certain caste and because of your caste, you are born into doing that work. It is very prevalent. Do you know who's the biggest violator of the Manual Scavenging Act in this country? Biggest violator of the Manual Scavenging Act. Manual scavenging, the idea of dry latrines have been banned in this country under a law which was a 1996 Manual Scavenging Act. It's prevalent in most parts of India, including Delhi, ma'am. Yes. So what happened was that, so how does justice work? You know? Huh? Who's the biggest violator? Indian Railways. Biggest violator of the Manual Scavenging Act is the Indian Railways. What happens? You shit into an open hole, the open hole goes onto the ground, and people are then responsible to clean the tracks, right? Because it does not automatically become part of the soil. Why? There are stones on there. The tracks have stones, so it cannot go down. Okay. So, and they also employ, so how does discrimination work? When we talked about this, essentially what you are talking about, ma'am, the newspaper articles are about sewer worker deaths. So, over time it's become banned and everybody said that it's terrible, let's not do this. And that's also the engagement, as I was saying, of what we are and what we aspire to be. So the aspirational idea is that why should somebody else be cleaning our own shit? It's somebody else's responsibility. It's a caste-based identity, it's many things. But how does blind justice work? Blind justice works in the way that the municipal corporation of most cities put out ads for hiring people who were supposed to work as sewer workers, right? But the qualification and criteria, sorry, my bad, are based entirely on a certain caste-based identity. So, people, manual scavengers who are now banned have moved into becoming sewer workers. Sewer work is actually highly toxic work. How many biology teachers are there? Ma'am, how does methane gas work in a biogas pit? There are times when you can walk in, right? So the idea of justice and injustice is very interesting. Justice and injustice, much like prejudice, is also ingrained. It is also something that you learn. You learn to live with injustice. You learn to fight for justice. These are also taught ideas. So in a classroom, when you talk about justice, you also have to explain to the child in the classroom that sometimes, like we do with many opportunities, I remember when my friend's mother had passed away very suddenly. For 3 months, there was an atmosphere in the classroom of protecting her. This wasn't a told idea, it was a felt idea. Our teachers were extremely sort of caring towards her. They would talk to her, you know, they would bring her snacks for lunch. They would ensure that she was, you know, eating well. I remember one day when she wore a dirty uniform, they sort of took it on her. They thought that it was an alarming sign and they did something about it. They spoke to the father and said, why is she wearing a dirty uniform? You know, don't you have anybody to help her clean? Should we be putting like clean shirts for her in the locker, you know? And all of those things happened in a classroom. But the other very interesting side of it, apart from all the love and affection and care, was also the fact that she was allowed not to do homework. Right? Because my teachers felt that she wasn't in the mental space for the first few months to be able to deal with it. Her mother had just passed away. It was very tragic, very sad. So they gave her space to grieve, they gave her also space to act out. When we talk about a diverse classroom, we also have to allow for children to act out. And that acting out sometimes is also from the idea, and our justice should be tempered with our understanding of two things: our own prejudice and of our own compassion. Those very teachers in my classroom could have been like, so what if your mother dies? Everybody's mothers die at some point in their lives, and that's justice. So why should you not do your homework when other children are forced into doing homework? Tomorrow somebody will say, oh, my pet dog has died, therefore I won't do homework. When my pet dog died, essentially, which happened in the same school, they were very, very comforting of the idea, because I came to school and I cried for a day and they really thought that my world had ended. But there was a recognition of both of the fact that this was allowed because we were all the same people. But would we do that in a classroom? Would we call out a child for being dirty, knowing very well that they come from a very, very poor family, and that maybe cleaning clothes on a daily basis is not something that happens in the classroom? I'd like to ask you, are you all primary level teachers or also higher, senior? Middle and senior? So now you would have gone through some children who are from EWS category. 10 साल हो गए, अब तो थोड़े से तो आपके पास आए होंगे. So tell me this, बहुत आए हैं. So tell me this, how many of us have actually gone to an EWS child's house? You've gone, ma'am. Where did you go? Yeah. But how was her house like? It was a one room? Half of that. And that's her house, yeah? Did it change the way you looked at that child from that day onwards? Yeah. But do you know them? Do you know about their lives? And if you do, excellent. But majority of us don't. I didn't know what it was like to be homeless, what it was like for a homeless person, till I started working with them. A little bit brief about me, I am a lawyer, but I'm also a human rights activist. I work with street children, and my interest has been in child rights. And I started working with street kids when I was about 19 years old, and I've continued working off and on with former street kids here. When we talk about many things, but in the classroom, I think the biggest question that we must talk about is the idea of privilege and our own child's recognition, an elite child's recognition of privilege. because it is entirely privilege. It is not a right. And if all that we provide in a classroom is a right, then all that the child gets in their life is a right, then all that the other children that I spoke to you about, the slum child and the street child, don't get, then it's a denial of their rights. It's an idea of injustice towards them. I give you a very, very sad story, which completely changed me personally. May not change you, I am not expecting that, but it changed me. When we started our first home for street kids and street girls a few months after we started a home for street boys, we sort of sat with them and a few days later and asked them, what do you like? What is the best thing about moving into a residential shelter for street kids? Some children said, "Padhai achhi hai," some children said many things. One kid got up and said, "मुझे 8 घंटा uninterrupted sleep मिली." I was brought up in a very socially conscious household, continuously reminded of my privilege. As my partner puts it, I have Madhubala guilt syndrome. I continuously feel guilty about my privilege. But that broke me as a person. Because but how many of us are conscious about the fact that our school setup, in the way that it addresses certain things, in our choice of prayers, in our choice of what are called heroes and figures, choose people that address a certain community, a certain way of life, and a certain behavior that we think is okay.
Now, but with due respect, I think if you take the example of our school, that is Banyan Tree schools, when we have the prayer in the morning, it is not a compulsory thing for all, the children of different religions to say the prayer. Okay. But I know of schools belonging to other religion where they make it a mandate for the teachers to attend the religious pujas that you are talking about. I'm not talking about Hinduism, I'm talking about the other religions.
Very good.
So that depends, I think, upon institution to institution.
I'm saying that as public schools that are non-religious, non-dominational schools. Do you understand the difference? See, if you're a DAV school or a Loreto school, or you're a Muslim, there's a famous Al Arabia or something in Old Delhi. If you're any of those schools and your children and your teachers are singing a certain religious song, you're an institution that recognizes its religious identity, and therefore are conscious about it. But when we say that we are non-denominational secular institutions, do we recognize that sometimes what we say and what we do is alienating? Not consciously, subconsciously. And it doesn't mean that it has to be alienating, that it is genuinely alienating for everybody. Not necessarily. I'm not saying that people, Muslims or Christians or Hindus, are uncomfortable with saying the prayer of another religion. I studied in Christian missionary institutions. We all sang it. I never felt anybody grumbling about the idea of it. That, yeah, we knew our nuns sang it, we sang it. But I went to DAV and they had Muslim children there who learned the shlokas and knew the Gayatri mantra by heart, and they were fine with it. I am not saying that the children do have to be, or the parents are unhappy with it. I am saying, are we conscious of the fact that it can be alienating? But we still have it, right?
And that's not something we also modify the things according to our will and choice.
Yeah.
Because, although we know that we are in a secular country and everything is acceptable, but then, depending upon the situation, sometimes things change. So
True.
that is how it goes.
True. True. Very true.
Maybe an accommodation is what is required, otherwise we wouldn't be staying together.
No, but my question to all of you is that, have we ever wondered, we are talking here about religious diversity, but have we ever wondered that are we promoting the idea of God in an institution when there are people who are atheists and may not believe in God, including children?
Maybe not God, but then a power over it. Maybe that's just a way of starting the day on a.
There are many things to start the day with. A thought for the day, a good idea, the idea of goodness. There are many things to start the day on. Are we, see, I am not saying it's right or wrong. My job here is to raise questions on the idea of what we call, what is our comfort zone. I am trying to push you out of them.
Basically, they're trying to create values in them that we should be thankful. That is the main essence of the prayer.
But that's the point. Should we be thankful because thankful to whom? That is one question. And thankful about something. That doesn't necessarily, that we are thankful about, and you have to teach children to be grateful for what they have and responsible in how they use it, exactly, transact it. But you also have to be, but are there other ways of doing it? Is the idea of teaching somebody to be grateful about parents, about instilling the fear of loss of parents, or is it just by sharing and making people grateful about it? And I don't have an answer. I mean, I studied in religious institutions. I never felt it was wrong. I never felt unhappy. I never felt bad about saying a prayer. I work with former street kids. We have a prayer there also. So it's not like I'm saying prayers are bad. I'm just asking you to think that when we talk about diversity, there are many diversities that we have been made conscious about. Religious identity, now sexual minorities, others. But the idea of diversity could also be a minority of one. When we talk about, and this brings me to the idea of liberty, the ability to speak freely. And I think one of the greatest gifts of the Constitution, which is the most under-recognized, is the way that the Constitution has been set up. The Constitution is essentially, as I was saying earlier, the legislature, executive, and the judiciary engaging with each other, dissenting, dialoguing, and differing, and coming to an agreement of something of a greater good, a consensus. And I think that the beauty of a good classroom is whether it accepts dissent. Dissent, diversity of opinions, and difference of thought. How much of that difference are we able to accept? What if a child gets up in our classroom and says, what you have taught me is wrong? Why not? Exactly. But our recognition of dissent in a classroom, it takes you to be very brave to be able to accept it. Those times are different, no, but I'm saying, I've also worked with children who've gone to government schools, where those times have not changed, where diversity of opinion in the classroom is not okay. I still feel that diversity of opinion in a classroom, in many, many occasions, is not okay. We are not okay with, you are not okay with saying something. Okay, let's say, there are many things that are said here, but let's say in this classroom, if a child gets up and raises a question that for us is fundamentally against us. It's not about what we are teaching them, because subject that we are teaching them is very different, but what we are teaching them about life is where the Constitution plays out, right? When you're teaching them that, okay, let's say I go into a classroom and I start telling them, you have privilege, you have privilege, you have privilege, therefore all of you are idiots and blah, 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 and they sort of push back. How much of that pushback, I found it very difficult personally to take it, and from your body language, it's clear that that's something that the schools that you all teach at, and the students that study in allow that space of conversation and dissent. And therefore, I'm going to move ahead so that we have more time. But I'd like to show you one video, if I can get this up and running.
हम भी अपना लड़कन के भूख पे जिए के सिखाता है।
Constitution, which is the idea of fraternity. The idea that it is important for us to be the idea of togetherness, bandhuta, the idea of togetherness, the idea that one cannot work without the other, that each of us play an equal and important role in ensuring that the society as is envisaged and as it's implemented works. That those who have privilege of wealth, of identity, owe it to those who have less than them to give back, to care, to bear the bigger burden. And so it brings me back to your classroom. It brings me back to the idea of caring. We will not be able to bring equality. We will not be able to create justice if we don't recognize that one without the other cannot work. Right? We have many, many people. Sometimes even I am frustrated and I turn around and say, why should I pay my taxes? Why? It's just, government is ridiculous, everything is terrible, the world is a bad place. But I look at, when people ask me, and I have this conversation with other people, I look at paying our taxes as an idea of fraternity. is the idea that we as people who have a little bit more than others give back to a framework that will ensure that others can rise up and something is created which makes it better for the rest of us, rest of those who do not have or may have but not enough. And much of the notions of both justice and equality will not work if we don't recognize that till we lift somebody else up, we are not going to be able to move as a collective. And it's about not leaving that last person behind, the hungry. It is about not leaving a person of a minority behind and allowing them to just disintegrate because they are not part of us. The idea of us is tempered with both the notion of diversity and the importance of equality. That for me, the bhaiya ji who is our driver bhaiya, who drives our bus, is equal and important as is the principal who is sitting out there. That without one or the other, this classroom will not work. My school will not exist. Similarly, it is not that because they do different jobs, they get paid differently, doesn't mean that they are not important. If our driver bhaiya disappears, who's going to bring us to school every day? So, and I would like to end this when we are talking about, supposed to do this for a bit longer, but there was also supposed to be question answers, so there's some time for that. Is what do I teach my child? But I think that in addition to teaching all of this, we have to go back to the idea of what is justice. And one of the most important features of justice is also accountability. This has nothing to do with the classroom. This has to do with everything in life. That those who work for us and work with us are accountable to the idea of India as enshrined in the Constitution. And those who provide a service, whether it is government, judiciary, legislature, do that and are therefore accountable to me and accountable to the last person. Are you all a CBSE school? I'm not sure. Do you still have the talisman on the side of the page of every textbook? NCRT books have it, no? What does it say? In times of most doubt, think of the last and most aggrieved man you have ever met, come across. If the decision you make will benefit him, it is a decision that will benefit everybody. In our classrooms also, the decision that we make with a sense of compassion for the most marginalized child in our classroom will make our classroom a better place for everybody, including us. I'd like to end here. In which setup? Are you saying within the...
If I'm opening it saying that 25% quotas, that means is it that
No.
they should not be?
No, it is the idea of equity is an integral part of the idea of equality. The equity that people who do not have deserve a space, a chance at that equal opportunity.
Yeah, but I feel that we are labeling them. So we are actually the discrimination or injustice would start because how many of the people would like to have the change in the perspective and they would actually label the child as the EWS child.
No, schools do, classrooms do, and
The biggest hindrance is the
that is the hindrance. But okay, guys. Sorry, ladies. Ma'am had said something. Ma'am, if you could, and then if you could, and then let's have a conversation.
I think my point is only this, that means the EWS that what we are saying should be given, open forum for the regular schools. That means we should not categorize them as EWS. I mean, it should be an open forum for all and every child who wants to come and learn. So why, because the injustice and what all we talked about, it starts to get there. Because it's a labeling.
Isn't there a contradiction that the government says equal opportunities for all and then at the same time we are asking their religion and caste?
Yeah.
These children, whether the person is a Hindu or Muslim, is that in the Hyundai's data goes to DOE.
Yeah.
That form prescribed from the government.
These children come from the DO's offices.
Yes.
They are the selectors of it.
Okay.
They themselves, the things are incorrect.
No. Okay. So, okay, to answer your question, ma'am, I think that education, in my opinion, is one of the most discriminating spaces, right? And this has nothing to do with you all personally. It is to do with the way the education system has been set up. Yeah? Yeah.
Now I had this child in my class last year in 11th standard. He was not belonging to any of the minority communities, but then according to the eligibility criteria for going ahead, he did not clear the exams, hence he was withheld in class 11. Now the parents did not want the child to be repeating the 11th standard, hence they withdrew the child and took him away. And probably he has got admission in some other school. Now the mother messages me and says that every child should be given a second opportunity because the child has managed to clear the board exams with about some 70%, 72% marks and probably treated some kind of injustice. So that really raises that question whether we were really just holding back the child because we had certain criteria for passing the child.
Yeah. Okay, so let me answer this, and then this. You have break? So let me answer these questions, then we'll take a break and then we'll come back. Huh? Okay. So to answer your question, ma'am, as I was saying that the way that we set up the system, it has already ensured that the inequality exists by where you're born. So if I can afford it, I place my child in a school that has many more services, many more ideas, and therefore sets me up for a better life opportunity already, right? How many of us say, oh, I'm so and so school alumnus, the moment my, all of those things have a work all over the world. I'm not saying that it's only here. It's like if you say you're a Harvard graduate sitting in some village in India also, if there's another Harvard graduate, they're suddenly like, you will be lifted out of that space. So we have that. We have that with Shriram School. We have that with, you know, oh, you're a modern school kid, you're a DOSCO, you're this, you're that. So there's a notion that where this will be, it will ensure this setup. Some countries have done away with private schools in their entirety and have only worked with government schools. The idea of what they call public schools and what we call government schools. And therefore, that idea will ensure that if you keep to the 8-kilometer radius, it will ensure that then people of different backgrounds, different identities, different ideas will enter the same classroom. But what we have been unable to do, and I feel that that was a shortcut that the government tried to create, is that they cannot raise the level of the classroom in a government school. So why not make private schools more equitable? While I don't have a disagreement with it, I don't think it serves the purpose, because in my opinion, it's not enough. I'm a little more radical on that front. I feel it's not enough. Because you do not address the inherent notions of inequality that will continue to exist, until you don't address that on a regular and more conscious basis, schools will continue to discriminate. I'll give you another sort of unlinked example about how it is also, it's not a matter of conscious discrimination, right? It's also a matter of it being subconscious. There was a study done of discrimination of Dalit children in classrooms. And it's a very, very famous study that looked at government schools in about 8 states, went to block level, taluka, actually sat in the classrooms and studied the idea of discrimination. So for the study, they invited a whole bunch of children from with MA backgrounds from different universities in the country, because it had to be done at this scale. They went and visited a lakh schools or something. And when they came back with these children, largely urban, largely upper caste children, they came back and said that there is no discrimination in the classroom, that the discrimination against Dalit children in the classroom is about 7%. Okay. The numbers were quite shocking, because anecdotally there is an agreement about discrimination in the classroom. So when they looked at who went to survey, they realized that they were largely upper middle class children, middle class, upper middle class children, upper caste children who had gone for the survey. So they changed that. They redid the survey and asked people of Dalit communities to go into a classroom and audit that classroom. And the numbers were dramatically different. Where they said 7%, these group turned around and said it was 85 to 90% in classrooms in the states that they'd visited. It has nothing to do with, these weren't the people who applied for the quota, applied the first batch versus the second batch, there was no difference. They were well-meaning people, they were interested in the cause, they were interested in the issue, they wanted to understand it. The difference was that they never understood discrimination because they never felt it. Our consciousness about discrimination in a classroom will vary based on who we engage with. So, I will give you a simple example. In a classroom, they normally sit on the floor in rural areas, or the Dalit children were sitting at the back. Now, as urban children and teachers who are teaching in urban schools, Usually the children who are backbenchers are the naughty ones, right? The ones who are not interested in the class, who want to do masti and therefore are sitting at the back. Sleepy ones also. You make them sit in the front. Yeah, so the children choose to sit at the back, right? And it's a choice in factor. It is also about naughtiness, it's also about the fact that they are better educated, they already know the subject, they are sleepy, many things, but it's a matter of choice. So as children young people who also use the backbench and understood the backbench as a politics of, we don't want to engage with the class that's happening, essentially. They assumed that the fact that Dalit children were sitting at the back was a notion of choice, whereas it was an act of discrimination. So only when you are discriminated against or engage with somebody who is discriminated would you understand that that's a form of discrimination. And therefore I feel that the classroom will continue to have this. As far as the religious identity etc. is concerned, it is again to identify how diverse our classrooms are. But the problem is that that data is not necessarily used progressively, but is used as an act again of further defining, segregating our own children. So while you may not want to do it, the fact that it is done consciously. Another very funny, these are unlinked examples, but they are just, so we have children who used to go to a well-meaning private school, and what they used to do was in the classroom, whenever donors used to come, like well-meaning के हमें कुछ बांटना है, कुछ देना है, कौन से आपके गरीब बच्चे हैं, तो what they would do was, somebody would walk in and say, सारे NGO के बच्चे खड़े हो जाओ, and then they would in the classroom have them get things, right? Now they are doing us a favor by ensuring that they get whatever they get, but when you're creating an equal classroom, why should you do this? Isn't it humiliating?
We are trying to cater this. Same for the EWS and the
Yes.
government to government things are happening.
And I'm saying please give them free books, please give them, but there's a way of doing it. There's a way of engaging with the child, ensuring that you can identify a special day, for example, in which only EWS children are called so that their books and all can be handed over. And don't do it in this way where people who are buying and the people who are getting free books have to interact, then the children feel humiliated. We've given up on the notion of also, I feel, of unused books, like used second-hand books. I remember when I was a child, I got my cousin sister's books. She was 5 years older than me, but every year her books were stashed away, she will use them, right, till 10th grade. Nowadays, my cousin didn't want to take my books and I was horrified because I loved them because all the notes were already on her side margins and she'd done all the homework and I would get everything for her. But children don't want it. They don't want it. They look at it like, why should I get somebody's second-hand clothes? Why should I get somebody's second-hand uniform? And therefore, then this aspiration also then reaches to poorer kids, right? Because then they want to fit in, they have to work much harder. So then they force their parents into buying more uniforms, ensuring that they are. How many of you watched Stanley Ka Dabba? It's a beautiful film on how a classroom is and so, but there again, it's how hard does the other child have to work to fit in. And therefore, ma'am, when you talk about, sometimes it's good to have many different people in your classroom to be able to engage, question, create diversity. I mean, I am not sure my child will ever grow up knowing a Muslim person because we are so ghettoized today. And if they don't know a Muslim person or a Christian person, how will they believe or engage with the idea when they are filled with hate? I mean, I don't, today somebody tells a child who's never, like in Gujarat, one of the experiments that they did was, because they are now so ghettoized as people, that they asked Muslim people and children, and Muslim children and Hindu children to talk about the other. And their notions about the other were so completely wrong, but they believed what they were told, कि ये तो ऐसे होते हैं. कल कोई बोल देगा कि मुसलमान लोगों के पास ऐसे सींग होते हैं और वो उनके पास टेल होता है, तो लोग बिलीव करेंगे, क्योंकि आप कभी देखे ही नहीं है किसी को. आज के ज़माने में अगर कोई हमसे कहता है कि मुसलमान लोग ख़राब हैं, हम लोगों की ज़िंदगी में कभी ना कभी कोई मुसलमान लोग रहे होंगे, कुछ मुसलमान लोग दोस्त रहे होंगे, तो हम कह सकते हैं यार कि मेरा मुसलमान दोस्त तो ऐसा नहीं था ना. क्या आज की डेट में, या my son is 9 months old, as I told you. When he is about 10 years old, I am not sure he would have met a Muslim person unless I consciously make the effort to do it. So what do we do? Our safe havens, what are oases, is the classrooms, where hopefully this diversity, the conversation, the dialogues will take place. So ma'am, when you say that the idea of injustice is very subjective, yes, and I think it also stems from the fact that we never teach our children that it's okay to fail as parents, that it's okay if you're not good at something, but you may be good at everything else. I mean, I love the film Tare Zameen Par, but I also didn't like it for the simple reason that that dyslexic child had to be good at something else. What if he wasn't good at anything else? Would we not love him enough? Would we not care about our child enough? Does he have to be an achiever for us to care? Do we have to, and now that I'm a parent, it bothers me even more, because I'm like, yeah, so what if he fails? But our notions about parenting are so warped that I feel that much of what you will have to fight against is actually the parents and the system. But the system is largely made up of parents. I mean, institution, because they feel that they're catering to this idea of what parents want, right? So I studied in Shriram school. When I studied in Shriram school, GD Goenka had just sort of was the big school with AC buses and this and that, and classrooms and everything, and we used to just be like horrified, because from teachers to parents everybody had told us that how can you have a classroom in which there's AC, etc., etc. But now I have my partners, sisters, etc., who put their child into Shriram, and now they're asking me which. I said, I can't put my child into Shriram. Why should he believe that he has to live a cushioned life his entire life? Is the idea of something as ridiculous as that? And it's parents who forced it on, right? Because this is what we want for our children. This is what she wants for her child. That he should have an AC bus to go back and forth from school. He should have an AC classroom. I said, फिर तो AC का वो भी करा दीजिए, basketball court. Why do you want to teach him swimming? Why do you want to teach him anything? Let him be cushioned, no? but you want the child to be cushioned also, but be an achiever also. These are not, these can't be notions, these are like contradictory notions. And therefore, when they walk out of they walk into the classroom believing that AC is their right, the fact that they must pass is their right, that you don't have to work hard for it, that somebody else has done a bad job by not working hard for you. Like your teacher should have worked harder on you. Yes, they should. But it also depends on you, but it also depends on the fact that you may not be good at it. And it's precisely this notion that, which is why we want the system to stay. Because our mediocre child, if he has to fight with a brilliant child of a driver's son, my own driver's son, and my son, if they are in the same classroom, and he happens to be more intelligent than me, than my son, it's like an